also hosted aboard this vessel and at the Ellis Island Information Desk. If you have any questions or have the last ferry will be departing from Liberty Island at 5:45 p.m. Ferry schedules are posted aboard this vessel and at the National Park Service Visitor Information Center.
Signaling on stairways.
I'm one of the park rangers here. What I'd like to do with you during the tour for the next 35 to 40 minutes is walk you around the grounds of Liberty Island and talk about the history and construction and meaning of the Statue of Liberty. And I hope I'll show you during the tour how the purpose of this island has changed dramatically over the years. It started out as a fortress designed to keep enemies out, and it's been transformed into the home of the Statue of Liberty that welcomes people from all over the world. I'm going to invite you all to participate during the tour, so please feel free to ask me questions. I'm also going to ask you guys some questions now and then. Starting right now, I'd like to invite you to look at this view behind me. This is the setting for the Statue of Liberty. There's a reason they put the statue here, and once they put it here, this location added new layers to the meaning of the statue. So take a look at this view, and what are some of the things you see in it that might make you want to put a monument here in the middle? What do you see behind me?
Light. Light. Oh, that's a good answer. Well, yeah, one world trade, and that came later.
But a great city. You know, the buildings were shorter when the statue was built, but it was still one of the biggest cities in the world. What was that?
Buildings.
Buildings, yep, lots of buildings. So that represents lots of people living here, lots of people coming in and out of trade, commerce, jobs, life. You're right.
Different avenues, waterways.
Waterways, yeah. This is really coming together of a couple rivers and the harbor entrance to the Atlantic. New York Harbor Harbor is one of the great harbors of the world, one of the best harbors. And through most of U.S. history, about 3/4 of the people arriving in the United States would come through New York Harbor. So this is really the gateway to America.
Aside from Ellis Island, what other points could you enter the country?
You can enter through any port. There's actually officially about 36 ports of entry. But you've mentioned another big element of this gateway, Ellis Island over there. For those of you who haven't been there yet, that's all the brown-topped buildings over there, including the big one with the 4 towers, which is the main building. So also 3/4 of the immigrants entering the United States in Ellis Island's day would have entered through Ellis Island.
But was there a focus by this country to put people through Ellis Island? Was that kind of a goal, or did it just happen that way?
Well, to make a long story short, as immigration grew in the mid-1900s, individual states started inspecting immigrants to make sure they were healthy, that they could support themselves, that they wouldn't be a danger or a burden to the country. And eventually, in 1890, the federal government took over that process to make everything consistent. And since New York was by far the largest port of entry, they chose Ellis Island, which was already federal property, for reasons I'm going to mention in a minute. They chose that to be the largest federal immigration station, but you go through a similar process, for example, in San Francisco. Lord, I've forgotten the name of the island.
Back then, you could do it.
Yes, you can.
1800s.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. Through any port. Yep. Oh Lord, I've forgotten the name. Angel Island was the biggest West Coast immigration station in
Right.
San Francisco. So if New York Harbor is the gateway to America, the inspectors and doctors at Ellis Island are the gatekeepers deciding who gets to enter.
Is that still the case?
Ellis is not an active immigration station anymore. Today it's the National Museum of Immigration. But they still go through actually a much more rigorous process today for legal immigrants than it was in Ellis Island's day. The whole process changed in 1924 to the visa system that we still use today, which means you do all your inspections and paperwork before you travel, getting a visa at the U.S. consulate in the country you're leaving. And when you get to this country, it becomes very decentralized. You show your visa going through customs at the airport or the ship's pier or the border crossing.
That's a visa where you're coming here to stay?
Yes, there are different types of visas that are all checked. But if you're coming specifically to immigrate, you have a certain kind of visa. Yep. So keep in mind this setting as we talk about the creation of the Statue of Liberty. We'll come back to it periodically. The statue today, of course, is very much associated with being a symbol of welcome to immigrants, but that was not its original meaning. And in fact, before the statue was here, this island had a very different purpose. This was part of a network of forts all around New York Harbor designed to defend the city from enemies. At first, the British during the War of 1812. You can see one of those forts from this spot. If you look behind those people. See that row of green trees over there? That's Governor's Island, which was the longest serving military base in U.S. history. And at the left edge of those trees, you can move if you need to look around these folks. The left edge of those trees, there's a brown building called Castle Williams. That's one of those War of 1812 forts. If any of you caught the ferry in New York today, you boarded at another one of the forts, the big round brown building Castle Clinton. By the way, both of these are national parks, historic sites today. If you go to Ellis Island, there's the ruins of a third fort. At the harbor entrance, there's one fort at each side. And there's a fort here on Liberty Island as well, or as it was known back then, Bedloe's Island. Bedloe was one of the early Dutch colonial owners of this island. So for our next stop, we're going to take a look at the fort here, and we'll figure out how this place went from being a fortress into the home of the Statue of Liberty. This spot is... Follow me this way. Where's the fort? Who can point to the fort? At the lowest layer of what is now the base of the Statue of Liberty is another one of those forts from the War of 1812 called Fort Wood. It's an 11-pointed star, this rough gray stone. And originally there would have been an open parade ground in the middle where the troops would have assembled. This network of forts all around the harbor was so strong that the British decided not to even try to attack New York in the War of 1812. They went down and burned Washington, D.C. instead, but that's another story. Fort Wood here never actually fired a shot except in target practice, but it did its job of deterring the British from attacking New York. After the war, Fort Wood rapidly becomes obsolete, and this becomes a very quiet military base that's used for training and storage. And we fast forward now to the year 1865, and this gentleman here. This is Edouard de Laboulaye, who is a French scholar and politician and philosopher and lawyer, a jack of all trades, but his specialty is studying the United States, American history and law and government. And he and his friends in Paris are admiring what's going on in the USA in 1865. What would that be? What's happening here then?
Civil War.
Civil War is coming to an end. So the United States has just survived a great national trauma that could have torn the country apart. It survived the assassination of President Lincoln, but it's come out of this trauma with more liberty than it had before. Why would that be?
Slavery.
Slavery is abolished. So a big group of Americans, African Americans, have liberty that didn't have it before. Now they're admiring all of this in France for a couple of reasons. First, France has not completely abolished slavery. It still exists in French colonies around the world. Also, though, France itself does not have a democracy in 1865. They're living under the dictatorship of Napoleon III. De Laboulaye and his friends would like to nudge France back to being a democracy and to abolishing slavery completely. But they can't do any of this too openly, or they would have been thrown in jail or worse by Napoleon's government. But they have an idea. They realize that America's centennial, our 100th birthday, is going to be coming up in 1876. What if the people of France, the people, gave a birthday present to America? Some sort of monument to liberty that would celebrate 100 years of American liberty and democracy, also 100 years of French-American friendship, because the French helped us win our independence in the Revolution. And this way, by honoring American liberty, they could indirectly make a statement in favor of more French liberty. So that's the beginning of the idea that will become the Statue of Liberty. The man who puts a face on this idea is the next little statue up there. That is Auguste Bartholdi. He is a French sculptor who loves colossal statues, like the ancient Egyptians and Greeks and Romans made. And he started to build colossal statues of his own in Europe. He gets very excited about this idea of a monument to liberty. He says, this is a colossal statue. It needs a colossal, this is a colossal idea. It needs a colossal statue. So he designs a huge work of art in the form of the ancient Roman goddess of liberty. Her name was Libertas, and she was the goddess of freed slaves. He calls this work of art Liberty, Enlightening the World. And he builds a number of symbols into the statue to illustrate that title. So take a look at her up there. What do you see her holding or wearing that might be a symbol for something to do with liberty? A A torch, okay. That torch represents the light of liberty that's going out to the whole world. Very good. What else does she have? A book. A lot of people think it's a book. It's actually a stone tablet, like the ancients would write laws on a stone tablet. But if you look and see how it's shaped, it's got those notches in the corners. That's because it's a keystone, the stone at the top of an arch that holds the whole arch together. Does anybody know which U.S. state is nicknamed the Keystone State? Pennsylvania. And written on the other side of the tablet is the most important date in U.S. and Pennsylvania history. What date would that be? 1776? What particular day? July 4th, 1776. And so what happens in the Keystone State on that day? Declaration of Independence. Yeah, we don't actually get it for sure for several years after that, but we declare our independence. So that tablet is a symbol for the Declaration of Independence, the founding of American liberty. It's also more broadly a symbol for the rule of law that makes democracy possible. So instead of having a king or a dictator to tell us all what to do, we make our own laws, we elect representatives to enact those laws so that everybody's treated equally. All right, that was a complicated symbol. What else do you see up there? Her crown. What we now call the crown is actually a halo, because she's a goddess, but there are 7 rays to that crown. Those represent the 7 continents and the 7 seas. So the light of liberty is going out to the entire world. Take a look at her feet. Is she standing still? No, she's moving. And if you remember to look at her from the boat, from her right side from a distance, you can really see that she's striding forward. That's because liberty cannot stand still. You don't just declare independence and not do anything else. You keep making new laws for new situations, keep expanding liberty to more people in more ways. What she's wearing on her feet and her body is also part of the symbol. She's wearing sandals. She is dressed as a free woman in ancient Rome would dress. Remember, she's the goddess of freed slaves, and only a free person in ancient Rome would wear anything on their feet. So that shows she's a free person. There's one other symbol up there that you actually cannot see from the ground, because when Bartholdi designed the statue, he didn't realize how tall the pedestal was going to be. So today you can only see this from helicopters flying around. Exactly. You've done your homework. So under her feet, there are broken chains, broken shackles. So that stands for the abolition of slavery. She's trampling on her chains. And more broadly, it means breaking the chains of any kind of tyranny. So these are all the symbols that the sculptor Bartholdi built in to illustrate liberty enlightening the world. Bartholdi figured out how to make all of this into a huge statue, and the material he decided to use was copper. She has made her skin out of 310 sheets of very thin copper, this thin. About the thickness of 2 pennies. And the technique they use to shape the copper is called repoussé, which is French for pushed. What you do is take a wooden mold in the shape you want, of her nose or her toe or whatever. You take a sheet of copper and heat it, and then someone hammers it with a wooden mallet into that mold until it's the right shape. Then you rivet all the pieces together and you have a statue. One other thing the artist did was recommend where to put the statue. He comes to New York scouting for he comes to America scouting for locations and trying to get some American partners to help with this project. His ship enters New York Harbor. He realizes this is the gateway to America. Millions of people will go in and out of this harbor. And in the middle of it all is this fort, which the U.S. government does not need anymore. Bartholdi succeeds in getting some American partners for the project, and eventually they convince the U.S. government to let them put the pedestal of the statue in that open parade ground in the middle of the fort. So that's how the statue comes to be here. And in a couple minutes, we'll talk about how putting it here expands the original meaning of the statue. But think back for a second about how she's made. If she's made of copper that thin, do you think that copper skin alone can hold the whole thing up? No, she would just collapse in a pile of rubble if it was just the copper. So the artist needs the help of an engineer to hold up this work of art. And if we walk down a little ways here, we'll take a look at that. And you recognize what this guy's holding? What is that?
Eiffel Tower.
Eiffel Tower. That's because this is Gustave Eiffel. And before he built the Eiffel Tower, he was the engineer of the Statue of Liberty. He's one of the greatest engineers of his time. He's known for building iron bridges, and he's going to put that knowledge of iron to use to build a skeleton, if you will, an internal framework to hold up that hollow, thin copper skin. The statue is built kind of like a tree. If you picture how a tree deals with the wind, a tree is not rigid. If it was too rigid, a strong wind would break it. Instead, a tree is flexible. It moves and sways. So does the Statue of Liberty. If you picture me as the tree trunk, it's kind of a miniature Eiffel Tower of thin iron girders inside. And branching out from that central trunk are smaller iron bars called the armature that are then connected to the copper skin. The whole thing is flexible. There are little pieces of metal called saddles that are U-shaped that are riveted to the skin at one end and the other end, and in the middle the armature moves. What that means is, as the temperature rises and falls, the statue can expand and contract. As the wind blows on a piece of the skin, the armature bars bounce, they spring. And in a strong wind, the whole statue will sway. The crown of the statue can sway up to 3 inches, the torch up to 5 inches. She is specifically designed to withstand hurricanes, like Hurricane Sandy in 2012. 90-mile-an-hour winds. We don't know if the crown swayed a little more than 3 inches because everybody had to abandon the island that day. The big damage from Hurricane Sandy came from flooding. There was a storm surge 13 feet above high tide, which is about even with the bottom of the fort there. So we would be struggling to stand in the water in this spot. That storm surge destroyed both docks on the island. It picked up the paving stones and most of the sidewalks. It wrecked the restaurant, the gift shop, our offices. The island was closed for 8.5 months to rebuild all of this. But the statue itself was just fine. She popped a couple of rivets, but suffered no significant damage because she is designed to withstand hurricanes. We just had to wait 8.5 months for us to rebuild the rest of the island to welcome her visitors back. So the statue for many people has become a symbol of endurance. Still standing after Hurricane Sandy, after September 11th, and she owes that endurance to her engineer, Gustave Eiffel. Now these last two statuettes are Americans who are involved in the building of the pedestal, the base of the statue. Remember, this is not a government project. These are private citizens in France and the United States. And the French agree that they will pay for and build the statue itself if the Americans will pay for and build a pedestal for her to stand on. Since there's no government money coming in for any of this, they have to come up with some creative fundraising methods. For example, the French make little models of the statue of different sizes for different donations. They license the use of the statue's image on commercial products. So you you could buy a French bottle of wine or a big roll of cheese with the picture of the statue on it, and the royalties go to build the statue itself. They hold concerts and art shows and auctions and lotteries. So the French are moving ahead with the fundraising and building, but it's going to take them a lot longer than they hoped. Remember, they were originally aiming for the U.S. centennial in 1876. All they've got built by that year is her right hand with the torch. But the torch travels to Philadelphia for the centennial celebration. What do? They let people go inside the torch to the little balcony around the flame. They charge them money to do that. A couple years later, they built her head. They let people go inside. They charge them money. The money goes to build the rest of her. So the French are building the statue in Paris, even if it's more slow than they hoped. But the Americans are having a lot more trouble raising money for the pedestal. A lot of Americans think, if this is a gift from the French, why do we have to pay for half of it? A lot of wealthy Americans are put off by the fact that this is a statue of the goddess of liberty. Because in the French Revolution, in the Reign of Terror, another image of that goddess of liberty was a more violent one, leading the masses to overthrow the rich. So wealthier Americans are not contributing to the pedestal fund. It's going nowhere. The man who solves this problem is this fella, Joseph Pulitzer, the newspaper publisher. He appeals in his newspaper to ordinary Americans. He says, this is not a statue for the rich. It's about democracy. It's everybody's statue. We should not wait for the rich to pay for the pedestal. If every American contributed just a small amount of money, we'd have more than enough to finish it. And as an incentive, for anyone who makes any size donation to the pedestal fund, he will put your name in his newspaper. That's a big deal before the internet, to have your name in the paper. So ordinary Americans send in $1 or $2. School children collect their pennies and send them in. And through lots of small donations, they raise more than $100,000 to complete the building of the pedestal. So Pulitzer really connected the statue for the first time to ordinary Americans. This last little statue is of an American poet, a woman named Emma Lazarus. She gets involved in one of the fundraising events for the pedestal, which was an art auction. She writes a poem for it called The New Colossus. Remember the old colossal statues of the ancient world, and Bartholdi is building a new Colossus. But Lazarus adds a really important new theme to the statue in her poem. You may have noticed, as I've talked about how the statue came to be, I have not once mentioned immigration, because the statue at first had nothing to do with immigration. She was about liberty and democracy and French-American friendship. But Emma Lazarus, she's descended from immigrants, and she works with modern immigrants. She realizes that if you put the statue here at the gateway to America, millions of immigrants, 3/4 of the immigrants entering the United States, are going to pass by the statue. So before the statue is even finished, Emma correctly predicts that the statue will become a great symbol of welcome to immigrants to a new land of freedom and opportunity. You may not know her name or the name of her poem, but you probably know some of her words. She wrote, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. I lift my lamp beside the golden door." So we owe a great debt to Emma Lazarus for expanding the meaning of the statue to the point where many people today think first of the statue as a symbol of welcome to immigrants. Now, before we go to our last stop, does anyone have any questions about how the statue came to be or how she's built? I don't know everything now. Well, thank you. It's Thank you. All right, well, we've got one more stop to make to finish building the statue, and the light is rebuilt here. And they're ready to dedicate her when she's all completed on October 28th, 1886. So it takes them 10 years longer than they expected, than they had hoped. So on that day, in October 1886, they have a big celebration with all sorts of speeches by dignitaries, bands playing, fireworks, boats all around. In Manhattan, they hold the world's first ticker tape parade. The parade for the statue goes through the financial district. Office boys in the stock trading firms get so excited they grab old rolls of ticker tape that they use to track the stock prices and they throw them out the window. And that's where we get the tradition of throwing paper on a parade. But there was one big group of people that are left out of this celebration. Think for a second, what group of people makes up more than half the population of the United States?
Women.
Women. Women are not allowed to come to this dedication of the statue of a woman, the goddess of liberty. The men who organized all of this, they thought that there's, too many people, too much hustle and bustle out in the weather. It's too much for the delicate sensibilities of women. There were a couple of wives and dignitaries who sneaked in, but women in general were not invited to this celebration. Now, women in the 1880s don't have the same rights as men. You don't get the right to vote in the United States till 1920. They don't have the same rights to hold property, to be citizens in their own right. Lots of different inequalities. But women are already fighting for equal rights. And some of them get very upset that they're left out of the celebration for the statue. So they hire a boat. It goes around the island with them waving banners and shouting slogans to protest being left out. And that's the beginning of another long tradition of protest at the Statue of Liberty. It's your constitutional right as an American to have freedom of speech. So you can disagree with the government, you can disagree with each other. As long as you're peaceful about it, you can demonstrate to show support for your views. So throughout the statue's history, many different groups have come here to protest for civil rights, against war, lots of different causes. And in the 20th century, as communication expands all over the world, people who've never been to New York and seen the statue in person have also recognized her as an international icon, a symbol of liberty. So an example of that was from 1989 from Tiananmen Square in China. Students are protesting because they want democracy in China. What do? They make their own model of a goddess of liberty as a takeoff on the statue because everyone knows what that international symbol means. So that's another way that her meaning has expanded. And I want to talk about one more new meaning of the statue in the 20th century. Tell me, if I asked you before you took this tour and learned all of this history, if I asked you what country does the Statue of Liberty represent, what would you say? All countries.
The U.S., of course.
The U.S., I think most people would say she represents the United States. She's become a symbol of the USA. That was a new meaning that was added in the 20th century because for her first couple decades, she was thought of as French because that's where she came from. But that changes at the time of the First World War in the 19-teens. Millions of American soldiers and sailors are being shipped to Europe to fight, and it's often billed as paying back the French for their help in our American Revolution. And a lot of those soldiers and sailors are leaving through New York Harbor. They're coming back through New York Harbor. So the statue becomes becomes a symbol of home for them, of the people they've left behind, of the values they're fighting for. The U.S. government starts using the statue on military recruiting posters, on war bonds to raise money for the war effort. Political cartoonists start using her as a female counterpart to Uncle Sam, representing the United States, not always in a flattering way, political cartoon, but that's another one of the freedoms she represents, the freedom of the press. And also in the 20th century, New York has started using her as a symbol of New York. So New York City and state governments, tour companies, sports teams also use her as a symbol. So I hope you've seen during the tour how the meaning of the statue has continued to expand over the years. She started out as a symbol of liberty and democracy. She has become a symbol, she also was at the beginning a symbol of French-American friendship. She's become a symbol of welcome to immigrants. She's become a symbol of endurance, of protest, a symbol of the USA and of New York. And I'd just like to leave you with this one last thought. As you play tourist today, you take photos, buy souvenirs, have something to eat. I'd like to encourage you to take just a minute or two to stop and think about what the Statue of Liberty means to you. How has your family looked for freedom and opportunity? How has your family endured hard times or showed patriotism or protested something in life? What other personal meanings does the statue have to you? Because today, in the 21st century, the meaning of the Statue of Liberty now depends on you and me and all of us to keep her marching forward in this new century. I want to thank you all for joining me on the tour. If anyone has any last questions, I will stick around. Otherwise, please enjoy the rest of your day in New York Harbor. Yeah.
Immigrants arriving into the U.S. between 1892 and 1924. Our current course recalls the voyages of approximately 12 million American immigrants. They passed through these waters on their way to Ellis Island and a new life. By the time they reached New York's busy harbor, they had already spent weeks at sea, usually on the small, overcrowded steerage decks of massive steamships. They were often excited, exhausted, and anxious about what lay ahead. As they neared the end of their journey, these immigrants were greeted by a number of overwhelming sights. Many of these same sights are visible to you today. Look at the Manhattan skyline. Imagine the awe these new arrivals must have felt as the city's grand vista emerged above the waves. For many, New York's landscape was like nothing they had ever seen before. Finally, the lumbering steamships docked in New York City's bustling port, and passengers were checked by immigration officials before being allowed into the U.S. Prior to 1892, most immigrants passed through Castle Garden, a former military installation now located in Battery Park at the tip of Lower Manhattan. Over the years, it has served as a theater, an opera house, and an aquarium. It is now a National Park Service site known as Castle Clinton. When the federal government took over the processing of immigrants in the 1890s, a new receiving station was constructed on Ellis Island. By the beginning of the 20th century, thousands reached the island's shores every day. You will have the opportunity to learn much more about these immigrants and their experiences during your visit today. The main building of the Ellis Island Immigration Station complex has been restored and is now a museum containing 3 floors of self-guided exhibits. Information is available at the desk on the main floor. An informative audio tour is included with your ticket and may be picked up when you arrive on each island. It includes a 30-minute Statue of Liberty audio tour and a 45-minute audio tour of the Ellis Island Museum. Food and gift services are available both aboard this vessel and on the main level of the museum. Eating and drinking are permitted only in designated areas. For those traveling with groups of children, the National Park Service requires that there be one chaperone with every 10 children, and that the group remain together at all times. Ellis Island is a wheelchair-accessible facility. Conditions permitting, the final ferry departure from Ellis Island will be at 6 p.m. Look back at the Statue of Liberty and the buildings of Ellis Island. What have these precious monuments meant to people over the years? What do they